believe that he is in the court building behind me here at Manchester Crown Court, but there has been a delay of about half an hour or so. We understand that is now due to events, and that Thomas Cashman will now not appear in court, so that means he won't be there in person to hear either the victim impact statements that are expected to be read out on behalf and by family members. He won't hear the arguments, mitigating arguments, both from his defence team but also the prosecution team, that may then affect the sentencing. And crucially, he won't be there in person to hear the sentence that he receives after being found guilty last week of Olivia's murder and further counts of attempted murder, the wounding of Olivia's mother, Cheryl Korbel, and 2 counts of possessing a firearm. That is quite an unusual turn of events. Olivia's family are here. Walking into court today, Olivia's mum said she simply didn't really know how she felt at the moment. A big part of them attending court, you might assume, was to be able to see Thomas Cashman as he's sentenced for the murder of little 9-year-old Olivia, but they won't receive that today unless perhaps during that break between the victim impact statements being read out and the judge returning for sentencing, maybe that might change. But we understand for now that Thomas Cashman, 34 years old, will not be in court in person to hear that sentence being delivered.
Sentencing that we are expecting this hour. As you said, it may go on until after 3 o'clock, depending on what's happening in the courtroom there at Manchester Crown Court. Worth reminding viewers, Katerina, how we got here today. Thomas Cashman found guilty on all counts on Thursday last week, including the count of murder. Remind us of those and what the expected sentence will be today.
Well, there are 5 charges that Thomas Cashman was found guilty of. The jury out for a relatively short space of time in the end, about a day and a half of deliberations after a 3-week trial here. Those 5 counts, including the murder of 9-year-old Olivia, the wounding of her mother, Cheryl Korbel, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, who the prosecution argued was the intended target of the initial attack by Thomas Cashman, and then 2 counts of possession of an illegal firearm. Now, after being found guilty of murder, the mandatory life sentence, there would be a mandatory life sentence, a minimum of 30 years, and then what will have been considered already by the judge and will be further argued in court today will be mitigating factors by both sides, both the prosecution and the defence. But I think one thing that will be taken into consideration is that Thomas Cashman throughout this has not shown any remorse, certainly in court. He has vehemently denied all of the charges against him, so that might play a part in determining the length of the sentence that he receives here. But it will be an extremely significant moment. This is a case, and you've heard it from the guests that you've spoken to over the last 40 minutes or so, Sarah Jane, this is a case that has shaken an entire community, an entire city, and it's probably not overblown to say when the news came out of the death of an innocent child, 9 years old, in a gangland related shooting, it was a story that shocked the entire country, and people will be watching. They will be noting now that Thomas Cashman has decided not to appear in court, to hear himself being sentenced, to hear firsthand the impact from Olivia's family that this has had on them. And I think it will be of course, an incredibly difficult but significant day for Olivia's family. We have seen her mother and her father arriving here in court today. Olivia Korbel walking in, clutching a pink teddy bear of Olivia's. Many of the family members wearing pink into court today, as they have throughout the trial, but also as they did at her funeral last year. I believe you were working that day, as I was, and remember hearing the eulogy of Olivia's mother and how she described that she still couldn't say goodbye to her daughter, and she would just every night in her head or out loud just say good night. And that is something that her mother will carry with her, and we are expecting a fuller family statement after this sentencing today.
Katerina, thank you. Katerina Vitozzi there, following events at Manchester Crown Court, the latest. As you heard there, Thomas Cashman, the man found guilty of the murder of little Olivia, refusing to go into the courtroom for his sentencing. We're going to follow events inside the courtroom closely here on Sky News. We'll bring you the sentencing live as and when it gets underway. Thomas Cashman refusing to go into the courtroom has caused a delay. We'll bring you an update as soon as we get it. But here at Sky News, we have spoken to the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, who told us that Olivia's murder should be a defining moment for the region.
Absolutely delighted that Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of Olivia. You know, devastating for her family. Simply can't imagine the pain that they've been going through since August last year, and I absolutely send my heartfelt condolences to the family. I know the conviction today is not going to bring Olivia back. It's not going to ease the pain of losing a daughter, but some small comfort for the person who snuffed out the life of Olivia far too early is now facing a life sentence behind bars. I would describe him as a coward, despicable. He decided on that night, or decided in the days beforehand, to play out a petty dispute using guns on the streets of Merseyside in the community of Dovecot. And that has had a devastating impact for Olivia's family, which they will live with for the rest of their lives, every waking moment and every moment they go to sleep. He made great play in the trial that he is a dad, and yet he's put Olivia's family through this trial. I hope he reflects every morning when he wakes up behind bars and every night when he goes to sleep about what he's put Olivia's family through. A cowardly criminal who decides to take the law into his own hands and settle petty disputes by using two firearms. Anybody who does that, they're not thinking about the consequences. They don't care about anybody who lives in their communities. He was just intent in settling what was a petty dispute, and the consequences for Olivia's family are devastating.
Do you believe you are on top of gang culture and organised crime in Liverpool?
I absolutely do, but I recognise that that is on the back of this year where we've had 5 people who've been killed in firearms murders. But Merseyside is recognised by HMIC, FRS, as outstanding in our approach to tackling serious and organised crime. We've got really strong teams in place to tackle firearms crime. We have seen in Merseyside we are at the lowest number of firearms discharges that we've seen in 20 years. You know, in 2012 we saw 125 firearms discharges. In 2021 that number was down at 39. So we are taking a positive and successful approach to tackling gun crime on the streets of Merseyside. Likewise with our approach to serious and organised crime. But I say that when 5 people have lost their lives, and to me that is, you know, the time to renew our commitment to working with our partners and working with our communities together to make sure that those offenders can't operate here in Merseyside.
While we continue to wait for the sentencing of Thomas Cashman here on Sky News, there has been a delay because Thomas Cashman wishes to be sentenced in his absence. He is refusing to enter the courtroom to hear his sentencing and hear the victim impact statements from Olivia Pratt-Korbel's family. We've got some more detail on this. Our North of England correspondent Katerina Vitozzi is standing by outside Manchester Crown Court. And there's some interesting detail coming out from inside the courtroom. Katerina.
Yes, in the last few minutes, the defence barrister for Thomas Cashman, who's John Cooper KC, explained to the judge, Mrs Justice Yip, why Thomas Cashman's decided not to come into the courtroom, although he is in the building behind me, Manchester Crown Court. And John Cooper KC saying that Mr Cashman was aware that the CPS, that's the Crown Prosecution Service, was singing "We Are the Champions" in the corridors following the guilty verdict in his trial on Thursday. Mr Cooper going on to say that Mr Cashman has been spoken to and given certain advice, but that he, referring to Mr Cashman, is concerned that the matter is turning into a circus, and it's for that reason he has not come into the courtroom. Mrs Justice Yip said in reference to that, though, that yes, she understood that may have been a sequence of events, but regarded Mr Cashman's decision not to attend courtroom as disrespectful, not only to the court, but those interested in the proceedings, including the family of the deceased. So just to remind you that we were expecting Thomas Cashman in court today to hear victim impact statements, to hear legal argument regarding his sentencing, but also to hear his sentencing after being found guilty of those 5 charges last week, including the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel. But as you can hear there, the reasons that he has decided not to attend or not to come into the courtroom in person after saying that he heard that the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, was singing "We Are the Champions" following a guilty verdict in his trial on Thursday.
We understand that everyone else with a part to play in the sentencing is inside the courtroom. No members of Thomas Cashman's family are present in the courtroom. He also looks to be absent as well. And Katerina, it's worth reminding people who may just be joining us here on Sky News, the sentence that is expected, the court duty bound to impose a sentence of life imprisonment.
Yes, and typically there would be a minimum of 30 years for a sentence of that gravity. What we will hear today in the course of the legal argument will be whether there are aggravating circumstances for that to be either longer or shorter. There are 5 charges that he will be sentenced on today. We are likely to hear if they will be run concurrently, but the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel would be the one that you would imagine would incur the longest sentence, a minimum of 30 years typically, as I said. And for Olivia's family today, this would have been the last opportunity, probably, for them to see Thomas Cashman in a courtroom. They've arrived here today. We've seen Olivia's mum, Cheryl, walking in, clutching a pink teddy bear, one of Olivia's favourite toys. We've seen Olivia's father. We've seen other family members all coming in, as they have done over the past 3 weeks of this trial. But they will not see Thomas Cashman in the dock today unless something massively significant changes, but it seems unlikely, and Mrs Justice Yip confirming that she will go ahead with the sentencing in his absence. Thomas Cashman making that decision not to enter court today. Of course, our viewers might remember that over the course of this trial, he has vehemently denied that he had any part to play in this shooting. He said he was not the gunman. He said he did not try to murder Joseph Nee, who the prosecution argued was the intended victim of this attack, that he did not wound Cheryl, that he did quite simply not pull the trigger. He has shown no remorse within the courtroom, although at times he was seen to be brushing away tears, where people described the sequence of events that led to Olivia Pratt-Korbel being shot in the chest that night. But no remorse, no, at any point, of course, he said he was not guilty for all these charges, and today a refusal for him to appear in person in court to hear his sentencing.
That is breaking news as we wait for Thomas Cashman to be sentenced for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel in Liverpool. Thomas Cashman has told his counsel, which has in turn told the judge, that he will not be appearing in the court dock this afternoon to hear his sentence. And as Katerina was saying there, nor to hear the family impact statements. Let's just remind viewers of the details of the case that has led us to the sentencing today. We can bring you footage now of Cashman's arrest. It was released after he was found guilty of murdering Olivia. The video shows Cashman being surrounded by armed officers on the 4th of September last year.
Come on, Dad! I'm on! Show your hands! Show your hands! Yeah, Dad! Get your hands behind your head!
My hands are in the air.
What's your leg, fella?
I've got nothing on me.
Put your hands behind your head.
OK, there you go.
Stay where you are. Do exactly what you've told. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? What's it for one? What have I done? What have I done? Tell you now. Go on. Put your knees up to your chest. Put your knees up to your chest. Sit on your arse. Stand up. What have I done? Go on.
You said you'll tell. I'm not racist. I ain't racist on one little bit. I just want to know what I've done. That's all. All I want to know is what I'm arrested for.
Just give me a second.
Tell me what I'm arrested for. Okay.
You're under arrest on suspicion of murder and a suspicion of attempt murder twice. All right, you do not have to say anything. But in my army's defence, we don't mention when questioned. Something which you may later line in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. All right, you've been arrested for the prompt and effective investigation of the offence.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah,
You need to be interviewed about it.
No offence. I haven't committed no offence what you're talking about.
All right.
Lift them up a little minute.
None whatsoever.
Thomas Cashman there being arrested by police. It's worth reminding you of what's going on in Manchester Crown Court right now. There's been a slight delay to the sentencing of Thomas Cashman because he is refusing to be inside that courtroom when the sentence is handed down by the judge, Mrs Justice Yip. The sentencing will be brought to you live here on Sky News, but the judge is going to deliver her sentencing remarks, which we can bring you live. This is after the prosecution and the defence have addressed the court. That is underway now. Standing by, our North of England correspondent, Katerina Vitozzi. And Katerina, remind us of the investigation that led to that moment we saw there and the arrest of Thomas Cashman.
Well, the murder of little 9-year-old Olivia sparked one of the most intense and even the officers involved would admit difficult investigations in Merseyside Police's history. They talked about combing hours and hours and hours of CCTV evidence, and you got a sense of that in the case that was presented here at Manchester Crown Court over the past 3 weeks. Moments and minutes and seconds leading up to the gunman chasing Joseph Nee down the street and then firing that shot into the house of Cheryl and Olivia Pratt-Korbel that in the end ultimately killed Olivia. Moments of these footage which showed Thomas Cashman's movement on that day were painstakingly presented in court to build a picture that the prosecution said was so compelling, that showed Thomas Cashman to be in the right place at the right time, that they felt it just brought a body of evidence that simply couldn't then in the end result in any other verdict other than a guilty verdict in terms of all the charges presented towards him. It has been an extremely difficult investigation, as I say, for Merseyside Police. We've heard interviews just in the last few hours with officers who were involved in it and really expressing how horrific it was that this was a case that involved a child who was ultimately entirely innocent, a family whose lives have been changed forever, caught up in a cycle of drug-based gang violence that has affected not only their family but our entire community, who were scared and frightened by what happened, and many of them feeling too frightened to come forward and speak. We actually know that Merseyside Police at times had to use legal proceedings to get people to release CCTV footage of what was happening outside their properties on that evening. Such was the fear of the gang-related environment that there is in parts of Merseyside and continues to be in parts of Merseyside. And Olivia Pratt-Korbel's family showing immense strength and immense courage coming into court every day. But also, crucially for the prosecution and for the police investigation, was the witness statement from really the main prosecution witness, a woman who is now in witness protection, whose identity was not revealed in court, but who was the woman who said that Thomas Cashman on that night, after Olivia had been shot dead, that Thomas Cashman came into her house, woke her up, seeming agitated, asking for clean clothes, and then overhearing a conversation within which he said, "I've done Joey," and the police saying that it was an immense act of bravery for that woman to come forward, given the context that I've just outlined. And it was an enormous police investigation, and one that has resulted in Thomas Cashman being found relatively quickly by the jury, 1.5 days or so of deliberation, guilty of all 5 charges against him: the murder of Olivia, 9-year-old Olivia, the wounding of her mother, Cheryl, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, the intended target of this attack, and then 2 counts of possession of an illegal firearm. And I think it's worth just reminding people that Thomas Cashman won't appear in court today. He's made that decision. His defence counsel's telling the judge it was because he heard that the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, had been singing "We Are the Champions" in the corridors after the guilty verdict was received on Thursday. Mr. Cashman saying he was concerned things were turning into a circus, but Mrs. Justice Yip saying that whether or not that was true, that was still not a sufficient reason for him not to be in court to hear his sentencing, calling it disrespectful not only towards the court but also towards Olivia's family, and confirming that she will sentence him even if he's not there to hear it in person.
We are waiting to bring you the sentencing remarks of the judge live here on Sky News as soon as they get underway. We are hearing at the moment victim personal impact statements inside the courtroom. Olivia's father has been, the legal team for Olivia's family have been reading out John Pratt's victim personal statement. He has said that I've been asked to do the impossible and put into words how the murder of my beautiful daughter has affected me. No words can make you understand the pain I am feeling. My heart... I beg your pardon. She would never be given the opportunity to fall in love and have her own children. I would never get the opportunity to see my daughter on her wedding day. Most of all, I'll never get to see her grow into the beautiful woman she was destined to become. We have been robbed of her future and the amazing teenager and adult she was destined to become. She will forever be 9. It's 3 o'clock. You're watching Sky News. We are waiting for the sentencing of Thomas Cashman live here on the programme. The man found guilty last week for the murder of the young girl you're seeing on your screen there, 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel. It's been confirmed within the last 15 to 20 minutes that 34-year-old Thomas Cashman will not be in court for sentencing. He is going to receive a life sentence for the murder of young Olivia. This is after he chased a rival into her home in Liverpool last August. He is a drug dealer. He traced a rival into the home of young Olivia Pratt-Korbel. It was a crime that shocked the country. Well, Olivia's mum arrived at court a short while ago.
Cheryl, can you just ask how you're feeling?
I don't really know.
For words for anyone not connected with this crime, how we feel today for Olivia's mum, it is impossible. Let's just bring you some more of the victim statement from Olivia's father, John Pratt, that's been read out in the last few moments. These are all done away from TV cameras. The sentencing remarks from the judge we will bring to you live. But John Pratt saying, no words can make you understand the pain that I am feeling. My heart has been forever broken by your actions. These, of course, the words of Olivia's father that he had hoped to say to Thomas Cashman directly, but of course he has chosen not to appear inside that courtroom today. Mr. Pratt goes on to say, you took the decision to shoot into Olivia's home with no regard to who was there. I want you to know you have changed my life forever. We will never be a whole family again. You did that to us. Mr. Pratt said that he moved away from Liverpool for a period, and he said it was a constant reminder of the loss of my beautiful daughter. We lost precious time due to the COVID pandemic, but we always saw Olivia as much as we could. Little did I know that was the day before her death, the last time I saw her. The victim statements, impact statements being read out in court right now. We will bring you more of those as they are read out. We will bring you the sentencing remarks from the judge, Justice Yip, live here on Sky News as soon as that gets underway. Let's bring in our North of England correspondent, Katerina Vitozzi, who's outside Manchester Crown Court for us. And Katerina, there has been a delay in the sentencing because of Thomas Cashman's refusal to enter the courtroom, but the proceedings are carrying on, and we're just into those deeply personal family impact statements, which is a chance for them to say exactly what Thomas Cashman's actions have done to their family.
Yes, and I think there would have been an expectation, certainly amongst the family members who are here, that those statements would have been heard in person by Thomas Cashman. But, as you say, he has taken the decision not to come into the courtroom today, although he is in the court building, Manchester Crown Court, behind me, and we understand that is because of a reason given by his defence barrister to the judge that Mr Cashman heard that after the guilty verdict on Thursday, that the Crown Prosecution Service, or members of the Crown Prosecution Service, were singing "We Are the Champions," and due to that, Mr Cashman says that he felt things were turning into a circus, and for that reason, he has decided not to come into the courtroom today. Mrs Justice Yip saying that she's felt that actually it was incredibly disrespectful, not only to the court, but of course also to the family of Olivia, that he has decided to do that, but she will continue the sentencing without him. But it also does mean, of course, that these victims' impact statements, we've already heard one read out on behalf of Olivia's father, it means that Thomas Cashman will not hear those firsthand and hear the heartbreak within those words. And in the last few minutes, Olivia's older sister, Chloe, has actually read out herself her own victim impact statement, moving into the witness box to recount her thoughts, feelings, what happened and what changed in that moment. On August 22nd, 2022, she says, "That day was the worst day of my life. Not only did I lose my baby sister, but I lost my best friend. I felt as though my heart had stopped beating. A piece of me left that night, and since then I felt as though I'm in a nightmare and I cannot wake up. My family and I are living in a real-life tragedy. This is all because of selfish people thinking it's okay to carry guns and putting innocent people at risk. I miss my baby sister. I miss my best friend. I miss sharing my bedroom with her and hearing her talk all the time. I'm beyond grateful to have had 9 years of Olivia. I will keep those memories forever." Those words read out in person by Olivia Pratt-Korbel's older sister, Chloe, who has been here pretty consistently over the past 3 weeks. Olivia's mum, Cheryl, being here every single day, coming in today, as she did on Thursday, clutching a pink teddy bear, one of Olivia's favourite toys, in one of her favourite colours, and it is a colour that members of Olivia's family have been wearing as they've come to court. It's a colour we saw people wearing on the day of her funeral. And Olivia, her mum today, in fact, we've just had Olivia's mum's, Cheryl's, victim impact statement. If we have time, I'll just read that to you now. Again, as I said, stepping into the witness box, carrying that pink teddy bear. She says the bear is made out of Olivia's pyjamas, and now it sleeps with her in her bed. And she talks at the moment Olivia was born prematurely, weighing just over 4 pounds, saying she was so tiny she fit in one hand. And she talks and recounts of the years of seeing Olivia grow up. She says, "I couldn't believe my baby was going into big school. She loved helping others. She had a special bond with one of her teachers who was such a social butterfly. She was particularly good with younger children. She was such a caring little girl." And she goes on to recount these special moments that she had with her daughter for 9 years, far too many, losing her in such a tragic way. And that victim impact statement of Cheryl Korbel, Olivia's mum, still ongoing in court right now. And as I said, Thomas Cashman will not be there in person in court to hear the impact of his actions that night, the impact it had. He's made that decision not to go into the courtroom, and confirmation from Mrs Justice Yip that he will be sentenced in his absence after making that decision not to come into the courtroom today.
Those family impact statements are being read out in court. After that comes the sentencing. Justice Yip will be delivering her sentencing remarks. We can bring that to you live here on Sky News. In the meantime, we can bring you some of those impact statements. Difficult for Katerina and I to read out. You can only imagine what it's like for family members to have to say these words in the courtroom without being able to say them to Thomas Cashman, the man who murdered their little Olivia. He has refused to go into the courtroom today. He has protested his innocence throughout this trial, but he has been found guilty and will be sentenced today for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel. Olivia's dad, John Pratt, the legal team read out his victim personal statement. He said that Olivia will be forever 9 and will never call me Dad again. He said, I've been asked to do the impossible and put into words how the murder of my beautiful daughter has affected me. No words can make you understand the pain I am feeling. He talked about sitting outside the cemetery because it was too painful to go inside because that would make Olivia's death real. The statement directly addressed Thomas Cashman, but of course Thomas Cashman not there. Olivia's dad said, you took the decision to shoot into Olivia's home with no regard to who was there. I want you to know you have changed my life forever. We will never be a whole family again. You did that to us. Mr. Pratt said he has nightmares about how Olivia died. Every day, those nightmares remind me of Olivia and what I have lost. Those 4 girls and my 2 older daughters are the only reason I'm still here. Every day I feel completely overwhelmed and I don't know how I'll cope. Katerina, you know, us two reading out those statements because we can't bring them to viewers here live on Sky News. It's difficult, but it's just a reminder of how important family statements are in court. It's their chance to speak. You know, if you're not giving evidence in a trial, that's a chance for them to tell the court, to tell the person that's committed that crime, to tell the world exactly how they feel and what justice means to them.
You are absolutely right in that the past 3 weeks, Olivia's family members have sat in the public gallery, they've listened to witness testimony, they've seen the pieces of CCTV, they've watched Thomas Cashman, they saw his defence and all his statements, and this, as you say, is their chance, if they're not called as a witness themselves, their chance for their voices to be heard in court. And I'll just read you a little bit more of the statement that's being made by Cheryl Korbel, reading this not via prosecution team, but herself in her own voice. These are her words, and she would have expected today to be able to deliver them directly to Thomas Cashman, but he has made the decision not to go into the courtroom, not to hear these victim impact statements and not to hear sentencing in person. Just a reminder that that decision was made, according to his defence team, by Mr Cashman after he heard the Crown Prosecution Service singing "We Are the Champions" after the verdicts were delivered on Thursday. His defence team saying that Mr Cashman was concerned things were turning into a circus now, so deciding not to come into the courtroom to hear the sentencing today. Mrs Justice Yip saying, though, she, in her view, felt like it was extremely disrespectful for him not to come in, disrespectful both to the court, but of course to Olivia's family, who were there now having those victim impact statements read out either on their behalf or by themselves directly. Olivia's mum, Cheryl, her victim impact statement is still ongoing now. The first few minutes of it was her just remembering what it was like from the moment that little Olivia, her youngest child, was born to the moment that that trigger was pulled on August 22nd last year, and she died totally an innocent bystander. And Ms Korbel continues in this victim impact statement. Sorry, do you...
Katerina, you have it there. I was just going to say there is more information coming out as to what Olivia's mum, Cheryl, was saying. We saw her there clutching that teddy bear that she described as being made from Olivia's pyjamas so that she could take her to bed with her every night. She does continue her victim impact statement. We've got more of it that you can bring us, Katerina.
Yeah, she describes what it's like now being in her home without Olivia there. She describes Olivia, who she calls Liv. Liv never stopped talking. She would be chatting away. One thing I miss most is hearing her say, "Mum." I just miss hearing her voice. It's just so quiet. I would do anything to have her chatting to me. It's so lonely without her. Everything is so quiet. I can't cope with the silence. Setting my alarm at 7:30 in the morning is something ingrained in me. The day goes by in a blur. It gets to 2:30 and I think about the school pickup, something I will never do again. She will always be my baby. Tea time is a big thing for me. It was so centred around her and what she wanted for tea. Everything I do is a constant reminder that she is not there with me. This happened in our home where we should have been safe. We have no choice to leave Liv's first and only home. When we were allowed back, it was utter heartbreak. It was as though time had stood still. The cups of tea on the table next to her Princess Trust form. One of her dolls lay on the floor. In that moment, I was home. We were back to how our lives were before that night. I soaked up the surroundings until reality dawned and brought me back to our living nightmare. It's heartbreaking to hear those feelings so condensed into these victim impact statements. And Cheryl Korbel continues to say in this statement, packing up our home was horrendous, packing clothes, her toys, packing my baby's things into a box. No mother should ever have to do that. We left our friends, our neighbours. It's so hard to go back to the area I grew up in and raise my children. The smallest things remind me of Liv, her friends playing in the street. It's hard to accept she is no longer here. And Cheryl Korbel, Olivia's mum, continues, the night I realised Liv had been shot, I was not able to do CPR properly because of my injury. Remember, she was shot in the wrist by the same bullet that passed through her front door, passed through her wrist, injuring her, and that was the same bullet that then hit Olivia in the chest. She says, I did not have full use of my hand and I felt helpless. My neighbour tried all he could to save my baby. My worst nightmare was being separated from Liv and not being there when she needed me most. I cannot get my head around how Cashman continued to shoot after hearing the terrifying screams, the utter devastation he has caused. He doesn't care. How could he? Those words directed from Olivia's mother, Cheryl, to Thomas Cashman, who she would have expected to be in the courtroom to hear them in person. But he has decided not to be in the courtroom today for reasons I've described, not there in person to hear the words, the impact that his actions has had and devastating a family and leading to the death of an innocent 9-year-old girl.
Katerina, thank you. Yes, we are continuing to hear family impact statements. Katerina, just remind us of the sentencing that's going to happen today, what we could expect.
Well, Thomas Cashman on Thursday was found guilty of 5 charges. 1, the murder of 9-year-old Olivia, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, who the prosecution say was the intended target of his attack. The wounding of Olivia's mother, Cheryl, as I described there, she talks about being wounded in the wrist and hand and unable to use that then to provide CPR to her daughter as she lay bleeding in the corridor, and then further 2 charges of the possession of an illegal firearm. Now, the guilty verdict in respect to the charge of murder against Olivia would mean a mandatory life sentence with a minimum term of around 30 years. What we're expecting to hear is further legal argument. There will be then deliberations by the judge who has taken her time with this sentencing. The guilty verdict came back on Thursday, but Mrs. Justice Yip saying she would take time to consider the sentencing, not coming back on Friday, but waiting until after the weekend to return that verdict. We'll also hear whether these sentences will run concurrently. There will undoubtedly be within the sentencing consideration of the fact that Thomas Cashman pleaded not guilty. He denied all these charges vehemently throughout this 3-week trial. He went into the witness stand and said, I was not the gunman, I did not do it. He showed no remorse for what had happened. So that will factor in, no doubt, to the sentencing that we're expecting today. after these victim impact statements are concluded, we would then expect a short pause while the judge retires to consider further her sentencing before then that is delivered. And that is something, that sentencing remarks, that we will be able to bring you live. For now, the victim impact statements continue to be read out in court. No cameras allowed at this point, but we can report what is being said, and it is important to hear what is being said because this, as you say, is one of the first opportunities that many members of Olivia Pratt-Korbel's family will have to address Thomas Cashman, or at least have now their words conveyed to him, given that he's now decided not to be in the courtroom. We've got some further detail of the victim impact statement of Olivia's mother, Cheryl, who says directly about Thomas Cashman that his actions have left the biggest hole in our lives that can never be filled. That man set out to do a job and he didn't care about anyone else who got in the way. He certainly couldn't own it either. Ryan, Chloe, those are Olivia's brother and sister, and I are just existing day to day. We have been waiting for the trial and not addressing how broken we are as a family. I can't think about rebuilding our lives without her. We have missed out on so much. My nan, who was 92, adored Liv and Liv her. Recently, her health deteriorated and she was admitted to hospital. Due to being at court every day, we've not been able to spend enough quality time with her, and I believe she held on long enough to hear that coward had been found guilty. Sadly, my nan passed away last night. This family have endured such incredible heartbreak. My 9-year-old Liv was the light of our lives. She was a character. She was my baby. She had amazing qualities and knew what she wanted in life. She will never get to wear a prom dress, have a sweet 16th birthday, walk down the aisle, or become a mother and have children of her own. All that promise for her future so cruelly taken away. Now I have to drive to the cemetery to be close to my baby daughter. I miss her smile, her kisses, her cuddles. She will always be with me, my little shadow. We love you, endless amounts. And those are the last words in Cheryl Korbel's victim impact statement. She's described in being in the court, in the courtroom, in the court just behind me, of returning to her seat, still clutching that teddy bear made, as she described, from Olivia's pyjamas that now she keeps with her in bed every night, her little shadow, as she describes her.
Oh, Katharina, thank you so much for reading that out. Difficult to hear, I mean, how Olivia's mum got up there and read out those words and kept her composure. You know, it's just incredible, the strength that that family have found, particularly as we heard there, a relative passed away last night, but they found comfort in the fact that Cheryl Korbel's nan was around long enough to find that Thomas Cashman had been found guilty of little Olivia's murder. We are expecting those sentencing remarks any moment now. We'll bring them to you live here on Sky News. Justice Yip will deliver those now that those impact statements have been read out. While we wait for that, let's speak to Chantal Lunt. She is a former police officer at Merseyside Police. Chantal, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Difficult for us to hear. I mean, you can't even imagine what it's like to be inside that courtroom and be part of that family that's dealing with this right now.
No, it's absolutely heartbreaking just listening to that victim impact statement by Cheryl Korbel. It's just, the lives have been destroyed, and, you know, the fact that Thomas Cashman didn't even turn up to court to hear the impact that his actions have had just really speaks to that indifference. But just, my heart goes out to the family. It's absolutely devastating, and just really gets you there. I think as a mother as well, you know, as a mother of an 8-year-old, just all of those things, as a little one being a shadow, really, really just heartbreaking. And she's so brave, Cheryl, for standing up in court and reading out her own statement too.
When she said she will never be called mum again by Olivia, and just the silence, there's so much noise, you know, created by a 9-year-old. As a mother, you know, those are the simple things that will haunt her, and that's what she laid bare there in the courtroom. Thomas Cashman, as we've been explaining to our viewers, not in the courtroom today to hear his sentence, nor hear those family impact statements that are either read out by parts of the legal team or by members of the family themselves. if they feel up to doing so. Olivia's sister and mother have stood up to read out their statements in their own words. And Chantel, so difficult for the family. I mean, I can't even find a word to describe what they're going through, but difficult for Merseyside police as well in terms of the pressure they were under. They will have felt this personally as well in terms of, look at little Olivia there. That's, one of their own in Liverpool. This was a community that came together to deliver justice for her.
Yeah. I mean, I think just the whole city felt it really. And as, the victim impact statement has shown, it's just, especially parents, it hit everyone on that level and really struck into that. Because it happened in the home, there's just this idea that you don't feel that anywhere is safe. So I think that when the police have investigated, that would really be at the forefront of their mind. They really needed to find this person. They needed to leave no stone unturned and work with the community to find a murderer, and also to reassure the community in terms of their response to, gang activity in the region as a whole. So it's good that he's been brought to justice. It's good that the sentencing is happening today, but there's no bringing Olivia back, and all that we can hope is that the sentence reflects the devastation that has been caused to the family and the wider community through his actions.
Chantel, a final question for you. What impact would this have on the gangs in Liverpool, the drug wars, as it's been called? Looking at little Olivia's face there, we have been here before, not just in Liverpool, but up and down the country, and we talk about watershed moments. This has to be the moment that things change. What's your view on that? Are you optimistic with regard to that?
I think, I know, as you touched upon, it's an issue that's countrywide, and it often happens in areas, working class areas, where there's a lot of marginalisation. I think for me, you've touched upon again, there's been children, there've been children like Rhys Jones. Last year, there was a 14-year-old schoolgirl in Liverpool who was shot in the neck in the crossfire. And what often happens is these gang wars spill out onto the street, and, children and innocent bystanders get caught in the crossfire. Years ago, it was, you very rarely heard of shootings happening in the daytime. Now they're happening in the daytime while, kids who are going to school are out on the street, and they're actually happening in the one safe space that children have, the homes. So I think it shook the community to the core. But in relation to gangs and criminal activity, I hope that the sentence really does reflect the crime, and it's enough to make people consider what the consequences of their actions are. Because if we look at what's happening in court with Thomas Cashman, there doesn't seem to be any remorse, there doesn't seem to be any reflection on what his actions have done and how they've devastated the family. There just seems to be basically, it'll be the severity of the sentence that really might make them sit up and look and take account of what has happened. But I think this is a moment for the wider community, for the police force to really sit up and look and have a look at where we are. And again, not just in Liverpool, not just in Merseyside, but in the wider UK, because this is, the prevalence of gangs are very much a reflection of the economic instability that we're facing, of the recessions, of marginalised communities, and young men who are getting younger and younger and younger being recruited into these gangs because they don't see another way. And I think we need not just a robust police response, not just the police rebuilding those links with the communities so that they know what is happening, so that they know what gang activity is happening, but we also need services. We need financial investment in communities so that young men aren't just walking into the arms of drug dealers, but into rooms where they're being interviewed for jobs, into rooms where they're being interviewed for positions in academia, because it's lack of opportunities and absolute underfunding. Liverpool's got some of the most deprived areas in the country, and that's where you see this gang culture, that's where you see this prevalence, and it's reflected in deprived areas all over the UK. But I think we need to use this as a watershed moment, not only to look at what's happening, but look at the response to what's happening. And it needs to be a holistic response that isn't just on the police, but is on all factors of public services, which includes massive reinvestment and a massive rebuilding of trust within communities.
Chantel Lunt, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon while we await the sentencing remarks from Justice Yip at Manchester Crown Court, the sentencing of Thomas Cashman for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel, due shortly. Chantel Lunt, former police officer at Merseyside Police. It's worth reminding viewers why Thomas Cashman isn't appearing in court today. It does cause a delay to proceedings. His legal counsel have told the judge that he is not appearing in court personally because the Crown Prosecution Service, members of the Crown Prosecution Service sang "We Are the Champions" following the verdict in his trial. The judge, Mrs Justice Yip, in response said she regarded his lack of attendance as disrespectful to not only the court, but those interested in proceedings, including the family of Olivia. Would the family of Olivia have been brave once again on her behalf today? They have read out those personal family impact statements to the courtroom. They had hoped that Thomas Cashman would be there to hear them directly. However, he is not in court. Olivia Pratt-Korbel's father, John Pratt, he had his statement read out on his behalf. He said, "I want you to know that you have changed my life and my family's life forever. I have nightmares about how she died, and the nightmares won't go away. I am heartbroken. Sometimes I just want to end it so that I can be with Olivia again. I want to visit Olivia, and I sometimes sit outside the cemetery, but I can't go in because if I do, it will all seem too real." Mr Pratt was in court, sitting, watching his statement be read out. The statement went on to say, "You have denied my beautiful girl Olivia her future. I will never see her on her wedding day and walk her down the aisle and see her grow into the beautiful woman she was destined to become. We have been robbed of her future because of you. She will always be forever 9. Olivia's sister, her older sister, stood up in court earlier to read her statement herself. She spoke from the witness box. Her sister is Chloe Korbel. She said this: "Olivia was the best friend I had always wanted. We were so close as I was not only her big sister, but I'd look after her when our mum was working. Olivia believed what was mine was also hers. I'd often look for something and not be able to find it. It'd turn up the next day in her makeup bag or in one of her drawers." Chloe said the day Olivia was killed was the worst of her life. She said, "Not only did I lose my baby sister, but I lost my best friend. When I was told she had passed away, I felt as though my heart stopped beating." Chloe said she and her family are living in a real-life tragedy because of selfish people thinking it's OK to carry guns. Chloe Korbel went on to say, "I miss my baby sister and I miss my best friend. All the things we should be doing, shopping together, laughing together and making memories." Chloe Korbel, just a teenager, standing up in that witness box this afternoon to deliver that statement on behalf of herself, her family and her little sister, Olivia. Well, Olivia's mum, Cheryl Korbel, stood up and read out her statement as well. She said that her 9-year-old was loved by everyone and never stopped talking. Cheryl Korbel in tears as she explained that Olivia was due to cut her hair to donate it to sick children, but was killed just 5 days before her appointment. Cheryl Korbel says, "I just miss hearing her voice. I would give anything in the world to have her chatting to me." Cheryl explained how the alarm goes off in their house at 7:30 in the morning every day. It's the time that she used to get up with Olivia, and the day then goes by in a blur. By 2:30, she says she is conditioned to be going on the school run, but that is something, she says, she will never be able to do again. Cheryl Korbel saying this happened in our home where we felt safe. She added that they were allowed to return to the house after the police investigation, and it was like time stood still. Cheryl Korbel saying, "I was not able to do CPR on Olivia because of my injury." You may remember that the bullet that fatally wounded young Olivia first went through the wrist of her mother. Cheryl Korbel saying, "I wasn't able to do CPR because of that injury. I felt helpless. My worst nightmare was being separated from Liv and not being with her when she needed me the most. I cannot get my head around how Cashman continued to shoot after he heard the screams. That man set out to do a job and he didn't care about anyone else or who got in the way." Olivia's mum saying it is so hard to go back to the area where she grew up and where she raised her 3 children. They've moved into a new house, which she said was difficult for the whole family. "I cannot even think about rebuilding our lives without her," she said. She went on to explain that while the trial has been on, her nan was admitted to hospital and she passed away last night. Cheryl Korbel saying that she believed her nan was holding on to hear that Thomas Cashman had been found guilty. She went on to describe Olivia as her shadow and ended her statement by saying her family will love her endlessly. Let's bring in our North of England correspondent, Katerina Vitozzi, who is at Manchester Crown Court. Katerina, the family impact statements have now been read out in court and the legal proceedings from both legal teams have finished. So it could be any time now within the next few minutes that we'll hear the judge's sentencing remarks live here on Sky News.
Yeah, Mrs. Justice Yip has temporarily left the courtroom. She will take a few minutes, we understand, and then come back to deliver her sentence. Remember, it's not just the charge of Olivia's murder that Thomas Cashman was found guilty of last week. There's also the attempted murder of Joseph Lee, the wounding of Olivia's mum, Cheryl Korbel, as you outlined there, injured in the wrist by the same bullet that would then pass through her and then hit her daughter in the middle of the chest. That one shot that was fatal, and then also further 2 counts of possessions of an illegal firearm. Thomas Cashman, though, not in court today, although he came to Manchester Crown Court. He refused to enter the courtroom. He has not heard the victim impact statements. He's not heard the legal arguments, and he will not be there in person to hear the sentencing when it is delivered. And it's worth reminding viewers who may have just joined us that he says the reason for that is because he understands, or he heard, that after the guilty verdicts were received on Thursday, that members of the Crown Prosecution Service were heard singing "We Are the Champions." And Mr. Cashman's defence say that their client, Thomas Cashman, felt like things were turning into a circus, and it's for those reasons he decided not to enter the courtroom. Mrs. Justice Yip, though, saying that she felt it was deeply disrespectful for him not to be in court, not just disrespectful to the court, but perhaps much more pertinently and crucially for Olivia's family, who have been either having had victim impact statements read out on their behalf or going into the witness box where they've seen Thomas Cashman give evidence, they've seen many people give evidence, but this is their turn to be heard, to have their statements, for them to be able to read out their own statements and describe their heartbreak. That statement from Olivia's older sister Chloe and her mum Cheryl, read out in Manchester Crown courtroom behind me just a few minutes ago. What can we expect from the sentencing? Well, the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel will mean a mandatory life sentence, but the discussion now will be looking at what the minimum term that Thomas Cashman will have to serve for that, a minimum term typically 30 years. There will be now consideration of whether he showed any remorse. Certainly in the courtroom he didn't. He vehemently denied all of the charges against him over the course of the past 3 weeks. All of the charges, including that of murdering Olivia. He said he wasn't the gunman, he never intended to attack Joseph Lee, he said he wasn't even there. But the jury here last week, taking about a day and a half after 3 weeks of testimony and witness statement, prosecution, defence argument, finding him guilty of all those charges against him. That sentencing now expected just in the next few minutes or so, and we will be able to bring you those sentencing remarks and the sentencing live via cameras that have been placed here at Manchester Crown Court. Those victim impact statements, though, happening with cameras off, although we have been able to hear and report the detail of them, and the heartbreak that the family of Olivia Pratt-Korbel have suffered over the past few months since she died on August the 22nd last year, of how their lives were changed utterly and how it continues to be a nightmare. Those feelings felt so clearly in those statements read out by Olivia's family members, and that statement read out on behalf of Olivia's father as well. So the sentencing now expected just in the next few
Katerina,
minutes.
I'm just going to interrupt you because we're going to cross live now to inside Manchester Crown Court, the sentencing of Thomas Cashman for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel. A warning, we're expecting the sentencing judge, Mrs. Justice Yip, to set out the details of Olivia's death. So we have to warn you, this may be distressing.
Has refused to come from the cells to be sentenced. I have directed that he should do so, but he has maintained his refusal. I am therefore left with no choice but to sentence him in his absence. These sentencing remarks will be made available to him in writing. All 5 offences arise out of the events of the 22nd of August 2022, when, armed with 2 guns, the defendant set out to kill Joseph Nee. He lay in wait before opening fire in a residential street. CCTV footage captured him standing over Mr. Nee, shooting at close range. When the first gun malfunctioned, Mr. Nee was able to scramble away, but the defendant had his second gun ready. He relentlessly pursued Mr. Nee, causing him to seek refuge by barging into the home occupied by Olivia's family. Undeterred and wholly unconcerned for the safety of others, he continued to shoot at Joseph Nee, firing into that family home. Olivia, just 9 years old, heard the commotion from her bed. Unsurprisingly, she came downstairs to seek the comfort of her mother. Her last words were, "Mum, I'm scared." In a terrible twist of fate, she had stepped directly into the line of fire. As her mother battled to keep the front door closed, the defendant fired a shot that passed straight through the door, then through Cheryl Korbel's wrist and into Olivia's chest, killing her. The defendant then managed to get his hand inside the door and fired another shot inside the house. Fortunately, the door was closed on his hand and the bullet discharged into the door frame, avoiding the people inside. For the murder of Olivia, there is only one sentence that can be passed. That is a mandatory life sentence. Let there be no misunderstanding about this. The sentence will be one of life imprisonment. That means that the defendant may spend the rest of his days in prison. However, for reasons I shall explain, this is not a case which requires a whole life order. I must therefore specify the minimum term which must elapse before the defendant can apply to be released on licence. That is the shortest period that he will be required to serve in prison. There is no guarantee that he will in fact be released at that stage. That will be a matter for the parole board. I will specify sentences for the other offences, but they will be served concurrently with the sentence for murder, which will reflect the totality of the offending. The killing of Olivia Pratt-Korbel is an offence that shocked not only the city of Liverpool, but the nation. Olivia's name is likely to be remembered for many years. She should not be remembered only for her dreadful last moments. Her family have spoken today of Olivia in life and of the hopes and dreams for her future, which were so cruelly snatched away. It is plain that Olivia was a lovely little girl who cared for others and brightened the lives of her family and friends. They have suffered an unimaginable loss, which they must carry for the rest of their lives. Nothing I say or do today will ease that, but they should know that they have my sympathy. The mental scars from that night will persist forever. Cheryl Korbel must also bear the physical scars on her wrist and hand. She must have suffered terrible pain as the bullet passed through her body, but her bravery and strength is obvious. She had fought to keep the trouble outside, and she ignored the pain as she desperately tried to save Olivia. The need for her to receive emergency treatment meant that she could not be with her daughter when she died. Nobody suggests that the defendant intended to kill Olivia or to harm Cheryl. But even if he did not know Olivia was in the firing line, the same cannot be said about Cheryl. She opened her door and stepped outside to see what was happening. She immediately recognised the gravity of the situation and hurried back to get inside and secure her home. It will have been apparent to the defendant that she was not connected with Joseph Nee and was trying to keep him out. He knew, therefore, that a wholly innocent woman was by the door, and yet that is where he chose to take aim. Had he paused to think for one moment, it would have been obvious that this was a family home and that others, perhaps including children, were at risk. But the defendant was focused only on the murder of Joseph Nee, and no one else mattered to him. Precisely what lay behind the attempt on Joseph Nee's life has not emerged. The court did not hear from him, and the defendant was certainly not willing to share the truth. On his own evidence, the defendant led a criminal lifestyle in the course of which he was prepared to use threats and violence. Mr. Nee was a man with enemies who had been shot at previously. That provides the context for what happened. Whatever Mr. Nee may have done, it plainly did not justify the attempt on his life. He suffered serious injuries and is lucky to be alive. After things went so tragically wrong, the defendant went to the home of the woman who was brave enough to come to court to give evidence against him. I have made an order granting her lifelong anonymity and will not name her now. Her evidence was significant, as they both realised. She chose to do the right thing. The defendant invented a defence designed to humiliate and undermine her. It did not work. She was subjected to lengthy questioning about the most intimate details, but she stood firm. I am sorry that she had to endure that, but endure it she did, and her courage is to be applauded. In sentencing for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel, I must follow the statutory provisions set out in Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act 2020. Paragraph 2(2)(b)(a) of Schedule 21 provides that the starting point for the murder of a child involving a substantial degree of planning or premeditation is a whole life order. I have considered whether that applies to this case, but have concluded it does not, because the planning and premeditation was not directed at the child. There is no doubt, though, that the seriousness of the murder, taken in combination with the other offences, is particularly grave, such as to require a lengthy minimum term. The starting point for any murder involving a firearm is 30 years, as set out in paragraph 3 of Schedule 21. I must then consider the aggravating and mitigating factors set out in paragraphs 9 and 10, together with any other relevant circumstances. There can be no doubt that this shooting involved a significant degree of planning and premeditation. I bear in mind that many, if not most, murders involving firearms involve some premeditation, and that is already accounted for in the starting point. The evidence in this case demonstrates planning going well beyond that. The defendant had sourced 2 guns, presumably to allow for the possibility of one misfiring. He knew what van Joseph Nee was driving, and I am sure that he was looking out for him earlier that day. Having spotted his van, he changed his clothes and concealed his face before heading towards him, only to realise that Mr. Nee had left. Later, having seen the van again, and realising Mr. Nee was likely to remain where he was until the end of the televised football, the defendant again changed his clothes, got into position and lay in wait. This was a targeted, planned execution attempt. It commenced in a residential street. Even as Mr. Nee ran for his life, the defendant ruthlessly pursued him. He then fired more shots as Mr. Nee tried to take cover in a determined effort to complete what he had set out to do. It is accepted on the defendant's behalf that Olivia was a particularly vulnerable victim because of her age. I do not necessarily agree that Olivia's age made her more vulnerable to being killed in these specific circumstances, but it is academic to debate whether the case comes within paragraph 9(b). The real gravity of this case is that a young child was shot and killed in her own home. As children do, Olivia was coming downstairs to seek reassurance. Cheryl Korbel should have been able to give that reassurance and to tuck Olivia back into bed. What's happened instead was chilling and strikes fear not only into the immediate community, but also into the minds of other children and their parents. Shooting into a family home with no regard for who may be caught in the crossfire is obviously a very significant aggravating factor which must be reflected in the minimum term. None of the statutory mitigating factors apply in this case. While right that there was no intent to kill Olivia, the fatal shot was fired with the clearest possible intent to kill, and I have determined that the shooting was premeditated. The fact that the intent was directed towards Joseph Nee offers no mitigation. Had the defendant planned to kill Olivia, he would have been facing a whole life order. Even had the defendant killed Joseph Nee rather than Olivia, the premeditated nature of the killing, the use of 2 firearms, and the firing of shots into a family home would still have required a substantial uplift. The fact that it was Olivia who died undoubtedly makes the offence more serious still. Further, I am not considering this offence in isolation. The defendant must also be sentenced for the other offences. I shall take care not to double count features that are common to counts 1 to 3. I am very conscious that the shot that killed Olivia was one of those aimed at Joseph Nee while attempting to kill him, and was the same shot that wounded Cheryl Korbel. However, I must reflect the fact that the harm caused was not limited to killing Olivia, but also included serious injury to 2 other people. Had I been sentencing the defendant for the attempted murder of Joseph Nee alone, I would have imposed a life sentence because of the obvious risk of serious harm he poses to members of the public. I agree with the submissions that this is a Category A2 case within the relevant sentencing guideline. That gives a starting point of a determinate sentence of 30 years and a range of 25 to 35 years. Even in the context of a Category A case, the offence is aggravated by the planning, the relentless pursuit of Mr Nee and the use of 2 firearms. So I will select a figure towards the upper end of the range. In setting the minimum term to be served on a discretionary life sentence, the notional term should be discounted by 1/3 to reflect the early release provisions which apply to a determinate sentence. I need not dwell further on the minimum term for count 2, since it will make no practical difference to the minimum term which must be served, which will be that imposed on count 1. For count 3, wounding Cheryl Korbel with intent to do grievous bodily harm to another, the offence falls into Category A2 in the relevant guideline, giving a starting point of 7 years imprisonment and a range of 6 to 10 years. The offence is aggravated by being committed against a woman in her own home, and I consider that a sentence at the top of that range is appropriate. The firearms offences charged as counts 4 and 5 are part and parcel of the other offences. It would be wholly artificial to consider the appropriate sentence for these 2 offences had they stood alone. They are Category A1 offences within the relevant guideline. The sentences on these counts will not impact on the overall term the defendant must serve. It is therefore unnecessary to say more, and I will simply adopt the starting point suggested by the guideline, namely 18 years imprisonment. I have explained the approach to the sentences for the individual offences only so that the defendant and others know how I have arrived at the eventual sentence which I impose. The reality is that the defendant's offending cannot be compartmentalised, and the minimum term to be served will reflect the totality of his offending. The defendant murdered Olivia Pratt-Korbel, a young child, in her own home. He did so in the course of attempting to murder Joseph Nee as part of a planned and sustained attack involving the use of 2 firearms. He caused serious injuries to Mr. Nee and came close to killing him. He also shot Cheryl Korbel, causing her significant physical injury, to say nothing of the psychological scars he caused her and others. That is the basis on which he will be sentenced. The defendant is now aged 34. He is not of previous good character. Any attempt to rely on an absence of any significant history of violence has to be viewed in the context of what he told the jury. He made it quite clear that he was a criminal who used threats and violence when it suited him. Although I will not treat that as aggravation, there is no mitigation to be found in his history. The defendant has not acknowledged his responsibility for Olivia's death and so has demonstrated no remorse. His failure to come into court is perhaps further evidence of that, although I make it clear that this has not caused me to increase his sentence. The defendant is a father, and I accept that being taken away from his children is a loss for him and for them. It is a loss that he is wholly responsible for. There is, in my judgment, no real mitigation available to the defendant. I now pronounce the sentence. On count 1, for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel, the sentence will be life imprisonment. The minimum term will be 42 years, less the time the defendant has already spent on remand. On count 2, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, the sentence is life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. On count 3, wounding Cheryl Korbel with intent to do grievous bodily harm to another, the sentence is 10 years imprisonment. On counts 4 and 5, the firearms offences, the sentence is 18 years imprisonment on each. All those sentences are to be served concurrently, meaning that the shortest period the defendant will be required to serve before he can be considered for early release from the sentence of life imprisonment is 42 years, less the 182 days he has served on remand. After he has served that minimum term, he can only be released if the parole board decide that is appropriate. He would then remain on licence for the remainder of his life. The statutory surcharge will be added to the record. Thank you. That completes my sentencing remarks and it completes the sentencing hearing.
Well, there you have it, the sentencing of Thomas Cashman for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel. It is a life sentence with a minimum of 42 years. It is 42 years until he can apply for parole. Let's bring in our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, who is outside Manchester Crown Court for us. And Martin, there were cheers outside the court there as the news came out about that sentencing.
Yes, I mean, I'm not quite clear who was cheering, but clearly supporters of Olivia's family who've just heard the news relayed from inside court. Of course, it's a tiny court and there's very little room for any members of the public, so news is filtering out within seconds of it happening. Yes, 42 years, that's a huge minimum sentence, and the judge making it clear that she had considered the possibility of giving Cashman a whole life sentence, but decided not to because she had to accept that he had not intended to kill Olivia. A whole life sentence she might have given to him for the premeditated gun murder of a child, but it was clear to everybody throughout the hearing that his target was somebody else. He was chasing another criminal, Joseph Nee, and had intended to kill him. So the judge making it very clear that it was a fine line, but she did give him, if you like, the benefit of the doubt. So he's got a minimum 42 years, which means that he will be 76 before he's got any chance of being released. That will be his first opportunity to ask for parole. And I guess a lot of people might think that perhaps effectively that is a whole life sentence. She did make it clear, as judges always do in these circumstances, that even at the end of 42 years, there would be no guarantee that he would be freed. She summed it up towards the end, saying that this is why she was giving him the sentence she then delivered, that it was the murder of a young child in her own home while he was trying to kill somebody else. And indeed, as part of that crime, he shot Olivia's mother, causing her a significant injury and, of course, causing psychological scars to other people in the house and to others outside of the house. She said he hadn't acknowledged his responsibility, so there could be no remorse. She said he's a father, and she acknowledged that he would be separated from his own family, but that, she said, was all his doing.
And Martin, what happens now? Thomas Cashman, as we've been telling our viewers, wasn't in court today. The reasons behind that were apparently connected to staff from the CPS singing after his guilty verdict last week. Remind us of the circumstances about why he wasn't in court and what's going to happen to him now.
Well, yeah, the whole thing was held up for about 40 minutes this afternoon, and it began to filter down that he was refusing to appear in court, and there's nothing the judge can do about that. She reluctantly had to accept it, and the reason we understand is that he became aware that on his conviction last week, somebody within the Crown Prosecution Service, or a number of people perhaps, were singing We Are the Champions, the famous Queen song, a much celebrated anthem on many, many different occasions. We don't know whether that was something he claimed to have witnessed himself, but he made it clear to his lawyer that that had upset him. He also said to his lawyer that the whole proceedings, in his view, were turning into a circus, and on that basis he refused to appear in court. I mean, he'd been brought here many hours ago from prison in Manchester, so everybody anticipated that he would appear in court, but he didn't, and that was the reason given, and the judge having to say that she accepted that. But she did say that she found that disrespectful to her and her court, but more importantly, disrespectful to Olivia's family. He will now be taken back to prison, and at some stage will probably be moved to another prison where he'll begin the start of that very, very long sentence. I can't remember anybody other than convicted terrorists being given that kind of minimum sentence, 42 years.
It's just gone 4 o'clock. You're watching Sky News. If you are just joining us, Thomas Cashman has just been given a life sentence with a minimum term of 42 years for the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel in Liverpool. Judge Mrs. Justice Yip said that the planned murder of a child requires a whole life term, but that is not applicable here as the planning and premeditation was not directed at the child. But she said the crime remained particularly grave and chilling. She went on in her sentencing remarks to explain the terms of the 5 counts that Thomas Cashman was found guilty of last week, including the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel. All the sentences are going to run concurrently with the murder sentence. All of the sentences reflected in the totality of the sentence, which, as we have just found out within the last few minutes, is a life sentence with a minimum term of 42 years. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt has been following events at Manchester Crown Court. He is outside the building for us now. And Martin, it's been the most unimaginable time for the family and friends of young Olivia. They have been in court every day. They delivered their family impact statements in that courtroom today that I'm sure they had hoped to deliver directly to Thomas Cashman, the man responsible for young Olivia's murder. That wasn't to be, as he refused to be in attendance today. But we understand that they will be speaking outside court a little later as well.
we're expecting to hear from Olivia's aunt. We may hear from Olivia's mother, and of course we'll hear from the police and the Crown prosecutors. Yes, they may feel they were deprived of something important by Thomas Cashman's refusal to go into court. Nevertheless, those statements, and very moving they were delivered. The first came from John Pratt, who is Olivia's father. He talked about seeing his daughter the day before she was murdered. He talked about how life has been so difficult for him since her murder. He couldn't cope with the media coverage, had to leave Liverpool. He talked about sitting outside the cemetery where Olivia is buried to be close to her. He talked about Olivia being deprived of her future, but also he and Olivia being deprived of that one big thing that all fathers look forward to with daughters, walking their daughter down the aisle on their wedding day. He said that will never happen. We then heard from Olivia's older sister, Chloe. She read her statement, tearful at times, but she talked about when Olivia was born. She was 8 years older than Olivia. That was a day that she received her best ever present. She was her baby sister, but they became good friends. And she too talked about what she and Olivia have lost together by Olivia's death. They'll never go shopping together, she said. They'll never be able to confide in each other when they've got things to share, private things to share. Then we heard from Olivia's mother, Cheryl. She too read her statement, and she referred throughout not to Olivia but to Liv, the name that she knew her daughter by. She too was sometimes tearful. She talked about how every day at around 2:30 was a very difficult time for her. That hadn't changed since Olivia's death. That was school pickup time, she said, when she would go and collect Olivia from school. We'll never be able to do that together, she said. One of the very moving points she made was that because she was injured by the bullet that killed Olivia, remember the bullet went through the door and then through Cheryl Korbel's hand, she was unable to give Olivia the life-saving treatment that she wanted to so desperately. She couldn't give her CPR, she said, because she was badly injured, and it was she had to wait for a neighbour to come in to make an attempt to keep Olivia alive. She said she also talked about her own mother, Olivia's nan, who had been seriously ill recently, in fact was terminally ill and had been brought home for end-of-life care. But she said remarkably she managed to hold on throughout the trial. She was still alive when the verdicts were delivered last Thursday, and said, Cheryl Korbel, her mother died last night. That was a very moving moment. And then we began to hear from the judge, and the judge began by saying that she had considered a whole life sentence without hope of parole for Cashman, but then outlined the reasons why she hadn't. And principally it was because, and the judge had to accept this, Cashman hadn't intended to kill Olivia. He had intended to kill the man he was chasing and the man he shot. And in fact, the bullet that he fired at the man he was trying to kill was the bullet that killed Olivia. So perhaps to all intents and purposes, the intent was transferred, the intent to kill was transferred from his target to Olivia. And I think that more than anything was borne out by that very long sentence, minimum sentence of 42 years before Cashman will even get the chance of asking for parole. And as the judge made clear, even at that stage, when he served 42 years in prison, and he'll be then, by then, 76, there'll be no guarantee of freedom. Perhaps, to all intents and purposes, this is a whole life sentence for Thomas Cashman.
Well, just to remind you of the breaking news, Thomas Cashman, the man found guilty of the murder of young Olivia Pratt-Korbel, just 9 at the time of her death, has this afternoon been sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 42 years. We are waiting for statements to be delivered outside Manchester Crown Court from family members as well as from Merseyside Police and the Crown Prosecution Service after the sentencing this afternoon. Martin, I just want to talk a little bit more about the judge's sentencing remarks in which she, talked about the bravery of not just Olivia's family, but also the key witness in this trial, a woman who was granted anonymity and will now, be in a witness protection programme, presumably for most of her life, after giving evidence against Thomas Cashman, and that was seen as the key evidence in this trial because, of course, it's worth reminding viewers that Thomas Cashman has not admitted guilt throughout this entire process, therefore has shown no remorse.
No, can I just correct something? I talked about the elderly family member who died. It was Cheryl's nan, so it was Olivia's great-nan who died last night. I said originally it was Olivia's grandmother, so we should make that clear. Yes, you were asking me, I think, about the witness, the main witness in this case, who was a woman who we can't identify. She's been granted anonymity for life. She was the main prosecution witness, and she told this compelling story about how Cashman, who claimed he wasn't the gunman, how Cashman had turned up at her house within minutes of the shooting in a bit of a state, wanting a change of clothes, and then talking to her partner, Paul Russell, a little bit later on, and the woman saying she clearly overheard Cashman saying, "I've done Joey," which she and the prosecution said was a reference to his shooting of Joseph Nee in the moments before he fired the final bullet at Joseph Nee, the bullet that killed Olivia. The judge talked about her exceptional bravery, how she wasn't shaken under pretty rigorous cross-examination by the defence. I mean, I didn't listen to those exchanges, but colleagues who did say it got very fiery. She was a very spirited witness and stuck to her story. And that, more than anything, perhaps, was what convinced the jury of Thomas Cashman's guilt. Now, that witness, talked during her evidence about her whole life had now been ruined, her children's life had been ruined. And although we don't know for certain, I think it's likely that she is somebody who will at least be offered witness protection of some degree, which might mean spending the whole of her life away from her family and friends. But clearly, she's been granted lifelong anonymity, and whatever the circumstances of her life from now on, they are going to be markedly different to what they were. But the judge paying tribute to that woman as a very brave witness.
So it's worth just reminding everybody what happened during the sentencing, not just the remarks, but the breakdown of the sentencing as well, because, of course, the headline is that life sentence with a minimum of 42 years for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel. But Thomas Cashman was found guilty on a number of other counts, and the sentences that were handed down for those are going to run concurrently. Perhaps you could break them down for us.
Yeah, so life for the murder of Olivia and a minimum sentence of 42 years. At that stage, he'll get his first opportunity to ask for parole, less 180 days, which is the time he spent in custody, which I guess effectively is neither here nor there. For the second conviction of attempted murder of Joseph Nee, the man he was chasing and trying to shoot, trying to kill, he got, again, life imprisonment, but a minimum sentence of 22 years. The third crime he was convicted of was wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. That's for the shooting of Olivia's mum, Cheryl. He got 10 years minimum sentence, 10 years for that. And for the final two crimes of possessing a firearm, remember there were 2 guns used in this murder, he was given 18 years for each of those crimes. But the judge making it clear that she had taken into account in deciding that minimum 42 years for the murder of Olivia, that did include the use of guns. So I suppose she might have let some of those sentences run consecutively, but she made it clear early on that they would be concurrent. So that's the breakdown of the sentences: 2 life sentences, a 10-year sentence, and 2 18-year sentences, all rolled into one, a minimum of 42 years in prison.
And Martin, just referring back to the sentencing remarks, when the judge was explaining these sentences, it's fascinating to watch live for our viewers to see that, just to, because often we just deliver the sentences in these big trials and people wonder how the judges come to that particular decision, that particular amount of time. And in this case, in the case of Thomas Cashman, a lot of the decision-making was centred around premeditation or planning.
Yes, the defence tried to argue, and it's a difficult job for the defending barrister, given everything that's happened in the last few days, the convictions and the outrage over this murder. He did try to argue that the level of planning wasn't substantial. He'd also argued, and was almost apologetic in the way he put this, he also argued that Cashman hadn't intended to kill Olivia. Well, the judge jumped in pretty quickly and said, well, he did intend to kill Joseph Nee, and the point wasn't lost, although she didn't make it absolutely clear that the bullet he fired at Joseph Nee was the bullet that killed Olivia. Forgotten what you asked me. Sorry.
It's a complicated matter. There are so many sentences that have come in, and there is so much information about this trial and this case, Martin. It's fine. I was just talking about how the judge decides on this sentence in the remarks. That's where it's laid out clear. So it's important for us to show it to the public. And her decision in this case was centred around premeditation and planning. That's what she took into consideration when she came up with the sentences.
Yes, I mean, she disagreed with the defence, which said that there wasn't a substantial amount of planning. She thought that there was, and she said the very fact that he took 2 guns with him, presumably in case one jammed, that showed a degree of planning. He had worked out the van that his target, Joseph Nee, would be driving, and was looking out for him. Remember, a big part of the prosecution case was that Cashman had been scoping Joseph Nee, looking for him for several hours on the day that he eventually shot him, walking past the house where he thought he would be, looking for his van, changing his clothes. She said that he changed his clothes twice during the day, and at one point obscuring his face. Remember some of those CCTV images of Thomas Cashman showed him wearing a hoodie up, sometimes because it was raining, but other times when it had already stopped raining, but he was still wearing something that obscured his face. And he lay in wait for more than half an hour or so, said the judge, having established that he'd found Joseph Nee's van, assuming that Joseph Nee was in the house where he was expecting him to be watching football that night. He lay in wait for him, and then ruthlessly pursued him down the road, firing several bullets at him. So on that basis, the judge felt there was a substantial degree of planning and premeditation. But more than anything, she said, the aggravating factor was that he had killed a person of Olivia's age. But for the fact that she hadn't been his main target, she would have considered giving him a whole life sentence in which he would never be able to ask for parole.
And Martin, emotion running high in this case and this trial. You know, just looking at 9-year-old Olivia and what her family are going through, it's easy to understand why, but emotion doesn't have a bearing on sentencing. But the judge did reference it in her sentencing remarks, saying that Olivia's death has shocked not only the city of Liverpool, but the nation. Olivia's name is likely to be remembered for many years. She should not be remembered only for her dreadful last moments.
Yes, I mean, the judge made it clear at the start of the trial, when the jury were listening to the videoed evidence of Olivia's mum, that they shouldn't, however difficult they found it, they shouldn't be swayed by emotion in coming to their decision, their verdicts. But I think it's quite different for the judge. I mean, that's perhaps some of the point of the impact statements that were read out by Olivia's closest family, that the judge would take into consideration the effect it's had on the family. And, you know, it was made very clear by Cheryl, Olivia's mum, and her father, and her elder sister Chloe, that they felt that not only had Olivia been robbed of her life and her future, they too had been robbed of their life with Olivia. And I think that must have played some part in the judge's determination of the sentence. But she did talk about unimaginable loss and the mental scars that will last forever among her family and perhaps other people. So I think the judge did very much take on board in her sentencing the impact on the family. She talked herself about how clearly Olivia was a lovely girl who cared for others, and that was something that her mother made clear in her statement, that she was much loved, but she was a very caring young girl who thought of others.
We are waiting, Martin, for some statements following this sentencing. We are expecting to hear from Olivia's family. We are told to expect Olivia's aunt, Louise Pratt, to give a statement, and perhaps if she's feeling up to it, because you can't even begin to imagine what she has been through today and over the last few months. Cheryl Korbel, Olivia's mother, may well say a few words as well. We are also expecting Merseyside Police and the Crown Prosecution Service. We don't want to prejudge what the family are going to say, Martin, but Merseyside Police and the CPS, what can we expect from them after this sentencing?
Well, I mean, we've already heard something from the police, but I think they will want to reflect on the sentence. And I'm sure, certainly from police and the Crown Prosecution Service, they will, and again, without preempting what they're going to say, but they, I'm sure, will hope that such a long sentence will act as some kind of deterrent. And, you know, Liverpool, Merseyside is an area that wrestles with a lot of gun crime, a lot of violence. Although there were signs in the last 2 years that the number of guns fired each year was coming down. In fact, last year or the year before, there was a record level, low level of gun discharges. But then, of course, Olivia's murder was the third of 3 in a week last August, the third gun murder in a week, and there have been 2 since. So nobody's suggesting that that gun crime has been eradicated, far from it, in Merseyside, but the police have been successful in limiting, up until Olivia's death, limiting the number of guns being fired on the street. I'm sure they will both make the point, the police and the Crown prosecutors, that they hope this sentence will act as a deterrent. And also, a point they've made in the past, was that the bravery of the witness, the main witness in the case coming forward, they too hope will be an indication to the community that you can come forward and give information to the police and be protected and be granted anonymity. Now, we'll only know whether that's going to work over the next couple of years or so, but certainly that's what will be on their minds.
Hey Martin, we'll take a slight pause there. If you're just joining us here on Sky News, we're reflecting on the sentence handed down today to Thomas Cashman for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel, just 9 years old, when she was shot by the man you see on your screen there back in August. He has been sentenced to life in prison this afternoon with a minimum of 42 years. So he will be in his 70s when he is eligible for parole. However, the judge was at pains today to point out that just because you apply for parole doesn't mean it will be granted. So that is Thomas Cashman today, sentenced for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel. We can bring you the judge's sentencing remarks. The judge is Mrs. Justice Yip. Let's listen in.
The defendant has not acknowledged his responsibility for Olivia's death and so has demonstrated no remorse. His failure to come into court is perhaps further evidence of that, although I make it clear that this has not caused me to increase his sentence. The defendant is a father, and I accept that being taken away from his children is a loss for him and for them. It is a loss that he is wholly responsible for. There is, in my judgment, no real mitigation available to the defendant. I now pronounce the sentence. On count 1, for the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel, the sentence will be life imprisonment. The minimum term will be 42 years, less the time the defendant has already spent on remand. On count 2, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, the sentence is life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. On count 3, wounding Cheryl Korbel with intent to do grievous bodily harm to another, the sentence is 10 years imprisonment. On counts 4 and 5, the firearms offences, the sentence is 18 years imprisonment on each. All those sentences are to be served concurrently, meaning that the shortest period the defendant will be required to serve before he can be considered for early release from the sentence of life imprisonment is 42 years, less the 182 days he has served on remand. After he has served that minimum term, he can only be released if the parole board decide that is appropriate.
The judge there with her sentencing remarks a little earlier on this afternoon. She handed down that life sentence with a minimum term of 42 years to Thomas Cashman. Well, before those sentencing remarks, the courtroom heard from members of Olivia's family, her mum, her dad and her older sister. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt is outside Manchester Crown Court for us. These impact statements, Martin, the family had hoped to deliver them to Thomas Cashman. That's, you know, you hear about those impacted by these horrendous crimes. They say that is their moment to stand up in court and tell the person who carried out the crimes against their family members exactly what it has done to their lives. They were not given that opportunity today because Thomas Cashman refused to go into the courtroom. But these statements were so powerful, particularly Olivia's mum, Martin. I know you've got some of it that you can bring to us here now.
Yes, they may feel they were deprived of something by Cashman's absence in court, but nevertheless, they went ahead with those statements, and we heard 3, the last of which was from Olivia's mum, Cheryl. She read her own statement, and throughout it, she referred to Olivia as Liv. Obviously, that was the name that she always called her. She was sometimes tearful. She choked on a couple of occasions. And she moved around in her thoughts. One of the early things she said was that how she finds it very difficult at 2:30 each day, which was the time she used to go and pick up Olivia from school. School pick-up time, she said, we'll never do that again. A couple of other things that sprang out very movingly. She talked about, at the time Olivia was shot, she too had been shot by the same bullet, the bullet that had gone through her front door, the family's front door, into her hand and caused her a serious injury. But it meant, she said, that at the moment where she should have been trying to save her daughter's life, she couldn't do CPR on her because of the injury to her hand. She said that a neighbour had to come into the house and perform CPR on Olivia, but she felt awful that she wasn't in a position to do that herself. Another very moving moment, Cheryl talked about her grandmother, Nan, who'd been very seriously ill, in fact had been moved home for end-of-life care, was dying throughout the trial, had clung on, according to Cheryl Korbel, and had clung on to life up until the point of the verdicts. It was as though she was hanging on, said Cheryl Korbel. And then she said that her grandmother, Olivia's great-grandmother, Nan, had died last night. A very, very sad moment for the whole family, but clearly Cheryl Korbel feeling that they gained something from her grandmother clinging to life and hearing that justice had been achieved last Thursday with those verdicts of guilty against Thomas Cashman. We heard from Chloe, Olivia's sister, too. She read her statement out, teenager Chloe. She described Olivia's birth, and Chloe is 8 years older than Olivia. She talked about her birth being the best present she'd ever had when Olivia was born. She said she was her baby sister, but they became good friends. She talked about what Olivia and she have been deprived of as close sisters, that they'll never go shopping together. They'll never confide in each other like sisters, siblings do, over secrets. So again, talking about the great loss of life to Olivia, but also what as family members they would lose together with Olivia's murder. The first statement was read out by the prosecutor. That came from Olivia's dad, John Pratt. He talked several times about being heartbroken. He recounted the last time he saw Olivia. Having been deprived of a lot of contact with her during the pandemic, he was beginning to see her again. He and Olivia's mother are separated, but he recounted the last meeting the day before she died, and talked about the conversation that sometimes daughters and fathers have, and Olivia saying to him, "Did you have a shave, especially to see me?" And him telling her that, yes, he had a shave just to see his daughter. He couldn't cope with the local media, people coming up to him and asking about Olivia. He said so much so that he'd had to move out of Liverpool. He talked also movingly about how he spent time sitting outside the cemetery where he could be close to his daughter. And again, like Olivia's mother and Olivia's sister, he talked about Olivia being deprived of her future, and something that, you know, all fathers look forward to. The fathers of daughters look forward to walking their daughters down the aisle on their wedding day. He said that was something that he'll never be able to do. So moving words from Olivia's father, one of 3 impact statements, very moving impact statements, delivered in the court, but without the presence of Thomas Cashman, who refused to be there.
Oh, that family have endured so much. They have been so brave today. Martin, thank you. You can see our camera there trained on the door. of Manchester Crown Court. That is because we are expecting statements from members of Olivia's family. We are expecting her aunt, Louise Pratt, to deliver some words on behalf of the family following the sentencing today of Thomas Cashman to life in prison with a minimum term of 42 years. We are also expecting to hear from Olivia's mum, Cheryl Korbel, who has arrived at court every day of this trial and again today, clutching a teddy bear made out of little Olivia's pyjamas. It's almost, oh gosh, it's almost too much bear, isn't it? And we are expecting to hear from her mum. Merseyside Police as well will deliver a statement alongside the senior Crown prosecutor from the Crown Prosecution Service. Martin, I say family members are hoping to deliver words. I mean, you know, Olivia's mum may do that, but, you know, given everything this family's been through, it depends on, you know, as she walked into court, she said she didn't know how to feel today. I'm not sure how she'll feel after that sentence, some kind of justice, hopefully. But it's the Merseyside Police and the Crown Prosecution Service. We will be hearing from them. And what are they likely to reflect on after today's sentencing, Martin?
I think they'll be delighted with the length of the minimum sentence. I can't remember anybody other than a terrorist being given that kind of minimum sentence. 42 years. Thomas Cashman will be 76 when he gets the first opportunity to ask for parole, and by no means will it be guaranteed at that stage. He'll still have to prove that he's of no danger or of little danger to the public. And I think the police and the prosecutors will be delighted at the length of that sentence. I've no idea what they were expecting, but I think all of us who followed this were probably expecting something in the high 30s, but 42 years may have broken, you know, a barrier in terms of non-terrorist sentencing, given that the judge had already ruled out the possibility of giving him a whole life sentence. I'm just getting a little bit of detail of what happened in court around the time of that sentence being delivered. There were gasps from Olivia's family. And we talked about seeing Olivia's mum and other members of the family coming out here on Thursday, just after those guilty verdicts. And, you know, for once there were smiles on Cheryl Korbel's face. And remember, she held up the pink teddy bear, the one that she's clutched every day throughout this trial, that she said today in her statement she sleeps with. It's a teddy bear that was made out of Olivia's pyjamas. And when she came out on Thursday, she held it up and sort of cried out, almost in a sense of triumph over those guilty verdicts, but of course a triumph set against the continuing enormity she and the family feel about the loss of Olivia. We're hoping that we'll hear from Cheryl Korbel. We're told that we will hear from Olivia's aunt, and of course we will hear, as we were saying, from the police and the CPS. And I think one of the points they'll want to emphasise is that they hope this case has shown that people can be brave within a very tight community. You know, how they dealt in this case with that awful conflict of outrage and a need for justice, but also loyalty to within the community and the fear of giving information to the police. I'm sure the police and the CPS do feel, I know they feel this, that this case has shown that people can come forward and, in their words, do the right thing. And they hope that perhaps a long, long sentence like this, 42 years for Thomas Cashman, will add to that sense that, that people will feel confident that things can get done if they come forward and give police information. And people, ruthless killers like Thomas Cashman, will go to prison for a very long time, perhaps for the rest of his life.
OK, Martin, I'm just going to take a pause there because we are hoping to hear from Merseyside Police. As Martin said, the senior investigating officer on Olivia's murder spoke to Sky News about the case, and he said it was unlike anything he'd encountered in his nearly 30-year police career.
I'm pleased we got justice for them after all this length of time. I mentioned before the dignity they showed through the course of the trial, particularly Cheryl, having to relive the incident again, must have been unbelievable. I will never know, and nor will any member of the investigation team, what she had to go through. And that's the same for father as well, Dad John. The pair of them, we'll never understand exactly what they've gone through, and nor should we even try. I've been in police nearly 30 years, so have colleagues. Probably never been involved with anything quite like that, if I'm going to be honest. The circumstances around it were just abhorrent. You know, she was cowering behind her mum because she was scared in her own home. You always feel as though you're safe in your own house.
OK, let's go to Manchester Crown Court. Louise Pratt, Olivia's aunt, delivering a statement after the sentencing of Thomas Cashman today to life in prison with a minimum term of 42 years. She is alongside Olivia's dad, John Pratt.
Yeah. I make this statement on behalf of my brother, Olivia's loving father, John Francis Pratt, who was completely heartbroken. Her older sisters, Kirsty and Kelsey, and the rest of the Pratt family. Following the conviction of Cashman and his sentence today, we would like to say we are happy with the outcome, but we will not be celebrating, as nothing will fill the gap left in our lives following the loss of Olivia. We would like to thank the jury for the correct verdict and the witness who showed courage and stood up for Olivia by giving evidence. We listened to you. We would also like to thank Merseyside Police and the officers from across the country who assisted in the investigation, the legal team, especially Mr McLachlan, for the hard work in getting justice for our Olivia. We would like to thank our flows, Jamie, Justin and Nikki, for the support they have given my brother and family over the hardest 7 months of our lives. Our thoughts are also with the families of Sam Rimmer, Ashley Dale, Jacqueline Rutter and Ellie Edwards. We hope you get the justice your loved ones they deserve. Our greatest hope is for this conviction to lead to more guns, and especially those used in the murder of Olivia, to be handed into the police so that no other families must go through this tragedy. Lastly, I would like to say Olivia Pratt-Korbel died a scared 9-year-old, and we hope Cashman is haunted by this knowledge for the rest of his life. Thank you.
A powerful note to end that family statement on. They hope that the thoughts of Thomas Cashman for the rest of his life are that of a very scared 9-year-old child. That child, of course, Olivia Pratt-Korbel, who came down the stairs in her family home for comfort after hearing the commotion created by Thomas Cashman in his pursuit of a drugs rival that went through her front door. And, of course, she was fatally wounded. Louise Pratt there saying that she hopes that thought haunts Thomas Cashman for the rest of his life. She gave that statement on behalf of the family. She said they are happy but not celebrating. She thanked the jury, the witness, the female witness who gave evidence against Thomas Cashman, and Merseyside Police, referring to our Olivia. She said the family have endured the hardest 7 months of our lives. She referenced a number of other families who are going through an equally harrowing ordeal, including the family of Ellie Edwards, who you will remember was shot on the Wirral on Christmas Eve. So they're generously giving their thoughts to those families going through similar ordeals right now. Let's bring in Martin Brunt. That is the first statement of a number we are expecting outside Manchester Crown Court after today's sentencing. Martin.
Yes, we may get another 3. We're certainly going to hear from the police. Mark Baker, the senior investigating officer who led the team of detectives, and we're going to hear from the Crown Prosecution Service as well. And we may hear from Cheryl Korbel, Olivia's mother. But yeah, very moving statement from Louise, who talked about the family being heartbroken, and made the point and how difficult it must be in these circumstances. Happy with the sentence, but no question of celebrating. How could you when something like this has happened? Nonetheless, grateful for that huge sentence of 42 years minimum for Thomas Cashman. And thanks, as we might have expected, for the witness, particularly the main witness, who was brave enough to come forward and give compelling evidence against Thomas Cashman. This wasn't the greatest gathering of prosecution evidence. There was no direct forensic evidence, there were no weapons recovered, there were no eyewitnesses to the shooting, and certainly nobody who could identify Thomas Cashman as the gunman. Nonetheless, people did come forward and give evidence enough to put together a prosecution case that convinced the jury of Thomas Cashman's guilt. So there were thanks from Olivia's Aunt Louise for the prosecution team. She talked about the hard work in getting justice for Olivia. And then she also said that their thoughts were with the other murder victims. Now remember that Olivia's murder was the third in a week gun murder last August, and there have been 2 more since. So she referenced each of those other gun murder victims from last year, and made the point that we've talked about already today, that they hope that this will lead, these verdicts, this long sentence will lead to more guns being handed in to the police, more guns being taken off the streets of Merseyside. And a final point, talking about how Olivia died, a scared 9-year-old, and the family hope that Thomas Cashman is haunted by that idea for the rest of his life.
Martin, for the moment, thank you. Let's bring you that statement in full from Olivia's aunt, Louise Pratt, speaking with Olivia's father, John, by her side.
I make this statement on behalf of my brother, Olivia's loving father, John Francis Pratt, who was completely heartbroken. Her older sisters, Kirsty and Kelsey, and the rest of the Pratt family. Following the conviction of Cashman and his sentence today, we would like to say we are happy with the outcome, but we will not be celebrating, as nothing will fill the gap left in our lives following the loss of Olivia. We would like to thank the jury for the correct verdict and the witness who showed courage and stood up for Olivia by giving evidence. We listened to you.
Let's take you back to Manchester Crown Court. Olivia's mother, Cheryl Korbel, coming out to make a statement after the sentence was handed down today to Thomas Cashman, a life sentence with a minimum of 42 years. Here she is.
On Thursday, 30th of March 2023, a verdict of guilty, which has confirmed our belief that Cashman murdered our beautiful Olivia. Olivia was just beautiful with her long brown hair and big brown eyes. She was such a social butterfly. She was particularly good with the younger children and was such a caring little girl. Liv was the light of our lives, a sassy, chatty girl who never ran out of energy. She was a character. She was my baby, and she had amazing qualities and knew what she wanted in life. Everyone adored her. She was the baby of our family, and my little love, my shadow. Now everything we do and everywhere we go is a constant reminder that she is not there with us, all that promise for her future so cruelly taken away. We can now draw a line under 7 months of agonising torment that we have had to endure at the hands of Cashman. Justice has prevailed, and I cannot begin to express our relief. I would like to extend our sincere gratitude and thanks to Mr McLaughlin and Mr Riding, the CPS, all the investigation team and police officers involved in working tirelessly to get this to court. My thanks go to the witnesses who bravely assisted the prosecution case and defied the usual stance of people do not grass. I would especially like to thank our family liaison officers, Detective Constable Louise Wright and Julie Moses, who have worked so hard and professionally with boundless dedication to achieve this result. We welcome the sentence given, but what I can say is that my family and I have already started our life sentence, having to spend the rest of our lives without Olivia. We are overwhelmed by the outstanding support of the public during this horrific time and wish to say thank you. We now ask for time and space to try and process what has happened to us over the past few months and, most importantly, grieve for our Olivia, who was so cruelly stolen from us. Thank you.
The mother of murdered 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel speaking outside Manchester Crown Court there, referring to our beautiful Olivia, describing some of the wonderful qualities of that little girl. She was a social butterfly, a caring little girl, and Cheryl there describing her as the light of our lives, a little girl who knew what she wanted in life. She called her my little love, my shadow. She said everything we do is now a constant reminder that she is not there. She went on to talk about the 7 months of agonising torment for her family. She wanted to thank the Merseyside police, the witnesses in the trial, who she said defied the stance that witnesses do not grasp. She said that she welcomes the life sentence today of Thomas Cashman, but says that her family has already started their life sentence of life without Olivia. She ended by asking that her family have the time and space they need to grieve. I'm going to bring back in our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, now. Martin, the emotion for the family of Olivia is clear. We've heard from investigating police officers in this case, and the emotion there is clear. And also for the community, the wider community, this is a case that has really shaken Liverpool, Merseyside, and it's fair to say the country as well.
Yes, we are told from the very few number of colleagues who were in court that the family were in tears at one point when that sentence was handed down.
Martin, I just have to interrupt you. Martin, I just have to interrupt you. I'm sorry. The senior investigating officer, Mark Baker, is now speaking.
Of the crime committed by Thomas Cashman. He now has a long time behind bars to contemplate his actions. In fact, he won't be out for a very long time, and he'll be an old man when he is. We heard earlier from Cheryl, Chloe and John of the devastating impact her death has had on all the families and friends. Today's sentence will never bring Olivia back. I again thank the witness who assisted in bringing to justice for Olivia's family. She did the correct thing, and she should be proud of herself. The courage and bravery that Olivia's family have shown is in direct contrast to the cowardice shown by Thomas Cashman. I hope that the sentence of 42 years given to Thomas Cashman today will act as a deterrent for anyone who thinks of picking up a gun and putting our communities at risk through their reckless behaviour. This has been a challenging, complex and emotional inquiry. I want to thank and praise the commitment, dedication and sheer determination of the investigation team as they pursued the truth. I want to thank our prosecuting barristers, Mr McLaughlin, Mr Riding, but reserve special thanks for Maria Kaur from the Crown Prosecution Service for her professionalism and the confidence that she placed in our inquiry team and her support throughout the investigation. Thank you. Thank you all.
Detective Superintendent Mark Baker there of Merseyside Police, the senior investigating officer in this case, reflecting there on the lengthy sentence handed down today to Thomas Cashman, a life sentence with a minimum term of 42 years. Mark Baker there saying that he felt the long sentence was time that Thomas Cashman would take to contemplate his actions. He said that the sentence will never bring Olivia back. He not only commended the bravery of the key witness in this case, the woman who anonymously gave evidence against Thomas Cashman. He said she did the correct thing and should be proud of herself. He also commended the bravery of Olivia's family, which he said was in direct contrast to what was shown by Thomas Cashman, who, of course, has not admitted guilt nor shown remorse. He said he hoped the sentence handed down today will be a deterrent to anyone thinking of picking up a gun. Let's bring in our senior crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, who was following that statement from outside court. Martin.
Well, very much as we expected, thanks to the victim, to the bravery of her, but also to the courage of Olivia's family. But that very telling point about hoping that today's sentence will act as a deterrent to anybody who's thinking of picking up a gun and embarking on reckless behaviour within Merseyside communities. Now, you know, we'll know, won't we, in the next few months whether it is having that effect. And we've spoken already about how Olivia's murder was the third gun murder in a week last August, and there have been 2 other gun murders since. So there have been some very, very serious gun crimes on Merseyside last year, 2 since Olivia's murder, although in the preceding 2 or 3 years, Merseyside Police have been very successful in reducing the number of gun discharges. Nonetheless, 5 gun murders within a few months is a terrible indictment of the level of gun crime in Merseyside. So much as Merseyside Police can hope that this will act as a deterrent, and perhaps more than the sentence, it's the fact that people were encouraged to come forward and give police information. Whether that does have the desired effect it's going to be difficult to tell. And I remember being here in 2007 when Rhys Jones, a young schoolboy, was caught in similar kind of circumstances, caught by a gangster's or a young gangster's bullet and died. How at that time people talked about the need for change, that enough is enough, and this was going to be a watershed in the level of gun crime in Merseyside, and of course it wasn't. I spent some time last week with a rather notorious figure, a man who was a gangster in Liverpool, and he made that point that, you know, although people are full of good intentions at times like this, most people go back to their lives, carry on as before. So much as Merseyside Police hope that this, and not just the police, but the communities hope that this will perhaps be a watershed in gun crime, it's difficult to see that that is going to happen in the way that people want it to.
Martin, thank you. Martin Brunt, following events outside Manchester Crown Court for us. We are waiting to hear from the Crown Prosecution Service. They are expected to deliver a statement outside Manchester Crown Court. The senior Crown Prosecutor will deliver those remarks. We'll bring them to you live here on Sky News as and when they come in. We have heard from Olivia's aunt this afternoon, speaking outside that court on behalf of the family, standing alongside Olivia's heartbroken father, John Pratt. She said that the family is happy today, but not celebrating. She said this has been the hardest 7 months of our lives. We have also heard from Olivia's mum as well, Cheryl Korbel. Olivia's father, John Pratt, gave a victim statement inside court, and some haunting words from him today. He said, "Olivia will never call me dad again. She will be forever 9. And he talked about sitting outside of the cemetery, unable to go in to visit Olivia because then it would seem all too real. Those victim statements read out in court today by Olivia's brave family members. Thomas Cashman not in attendance. He refused to attend in person for the sentencing and to hear the impact of his actions on Olivia's family. Let's listen now to Olivia's mum, Cheryl.
On Thursday, 30th of March 2023, a verdict of guilty, which has confirmed our belief that Cashman murdered our beautiful Olivia. Olivia was just beautiful with her long brown hair and big brown eyes. She was such a social butterfly. She was particularly good with the younger children and was such a caring little girl. Liv was the light of our lives, a sassy, chatty girl who never ran out of energy. She was a character. She was my baby and she had amazing qualities and knew what she wanted in life. Everyone adored her. She was the baby of our family and my little love, my shadow. Now everything we do and everywhere we go is a constant reminder that she is not there with us. All that promise for her future so cruelly taken away. We can now draw a line under 7 months of agonising torment that we have had to endure at the hands of Cashman. Justice has prevailed and I cannot begin to express our relief. I would like to extend our sincere gratitude and thanks to Mr McLaughlin and Mr Riding, the CPS, all the investigation team and police officers involved in working tirelessly to get this to court. My thanks go to the witnesses who bravely assisted the prosecution case and defied the usual stance of people do not grass. I would especially like to thank our family liaison officers, Detective Constable Louise Wright and Julie Moses, who have worked so hard and professionally with boundless dedication to achieve this result. We welcome the sentence given, but what I can say is that my family and I have already started our life sentence, having to spend the rest of our lives without Olivia. We are overwhelmed by the outstanding support of the public during this horrific time and wish to say thank you. We now ask for time and space to try and process what has happened to us over the past few months and most importantly, grieve for our Olivia who was so cruelly stolen from us. Thank you.
It's just coming up to 5 o'clock. You're watching the News Hour. I'm Mark Austin. Coming up in the next 60 minutes. The man who murdered 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel is jailed for life with a minimum term of 42 years. The judge accused Thomas Cashman of disrespect for refusing to appear in court to be sentenced.
The defendant has not acknowledged his responsibility for Olivia's death and so has demonstrated no remorse. His failure to come into court is perhaps further evidence of that.
Also this evening, former US President Donald Trump prepares to travel to New York to face criminal charges. He is expected to leave his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida in the next few minutes. He's then expected to board his plane at Palm Beach International Airport to take the 3-hour flight to New York City. There, Mr. Trump is expected to surrender to prosecutors to face charges relating to hush money paid to an adult film star. Also this evening, Russia blames Ukraine as it arrests a woman over the death of a pro-military blogger at a cafe in St. Petersburg. And as NATO confirms Finland will join the alliance tomorrow, the Kremlin pledges to boost its military capacity. Good evening, and we're just going to begin with these live pictures of Donald Trump's resort Mar-a-Lago in Florida. As I was just saying, he's about to leave to head to New York as he becomes the first American president or former American president to face criminal sanctions. He's expected to meet New York prosecutors tomorrow to face charges relating to hush money payments made to the adult movie star Stormy Daniels, and we'll bring you that little piece of history taking place in the United States as it happens live. But first, the man who killed 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel in Liverpool last year has been jailed for a minimum term of 42 years. The judge said Thomas Cashman had shown no remorse and refused to appear in court to be sentenced. He was convicted last week of shooting Olivia dead as he fired shots into her family home in Dovecot while pursuing another man last August.
Had he paused to think for one moment, it would have been obvious that this was a family home and that others, perhaps including children, were at risk.